You're watching FJTN, the Federal Judicial Television Network.
Oh, Officer Smith, come in. Please, make yourself comfortable. Lie down here. Just face forward. You don't need to look at me when you talk. Thanks, Doc. Now, why don't you tell me what comes to your mind when you think of conducting financial investigations?
Primal fear, Doc. I mean, I was never any good at math. I remember being teased by Sally Thornton in the 5th grade because I didn't know the difference between a numerator and a denominator.
Numerator and denominator. Very interesting.
I mean, I can barely balance my own checkbook, but they expect me to figure out whether these defendants can pay fines and restitution. It's really driving me crazy.
Now, you need to relax. Here, look into this globe. Think of it as your past. Get in touch with your past. Relax and breathe deep. Deeper, Officer Smith. Deeper.
Meet Carter J. Smith, a U.S. probation officer whose responsibilities, like those of his colleagues, include the investigation of offenders' financial backgrounds to determine their wherewithal to pay criminal monetary penalties. Officer Smith has been tyrannized by his fear of finance throughout his brief career, and now he seeks the counsel of one Dr. L.L. Bookbinder, an unheralded psychiatrist whose shingle hangs in a place we call the training zone.
Now, let's try getting in touch with your feelings. How do you feel about financial investigations?
Well, with a lot of my cases, it's no big deal. The offenders don't have any money, so maybe they'll pay some restitution when they get a job. But others, like the white-collar ones where a guy is self-employed or where a person is a career fraudster, I really hate those cases.
Why? Why do you hate those?
Because I don't want to look like an idiot in front of the offender. So I just end up taking shortcuts. But there's this guy at work, Bill. He says all I need to do is talk to the offender, see what he or she is willing to pay, and just try upping it a bit. Play hard-nosed, you know? But in the end, just cut a deal, get something coming in so everyone's happy.
But how does that make you feel?
I feel guilty. I just keep thinking about the victims, you know, because restitution is supposed to make them whole, and I should be doing a better job for them. But I'm so freaked out about the numbers and the money stuff and not knowing as much as the offender that I feel totally paralyzed.
You feel helpless.
Sort of. I just end up taking the path of least resistance. It's not the way it's supposed to work. I really want to do better.
Well, Officer Smith, I think I can recommend a service that'll help you relieve some of your anxiety. There's a special series of programs on the Federal Judicial Television Network. I want you to watch their financial investigation series. You take good notes and then contact them if you have any questions.
Thanks, Doc. I'll try it.
Submitted for your approval, Officer Carter J. Smith, a bright man with a conscience who wants to do his job better. He's made an important initial step by confronting his fear and doing something about it. Officer Smith stands at the threshold of a door called wisdom, and he's about to step across that threshold into the embracing warmth of the training zone. Hello and welcome to the FJC's new series on financial investigation. I'm Mark Sherman. The purposes of this series are to demystify financial investigation, deepen your knowledge of the subject matter, and examine the techniques contained in the Financial Investigation Desk Reference for U.S. Probation and Pretrial Services Officers. Now, the desk reference incorporates much of the information contained in the Monograph 114 on criminal monetary penalties, as well as the forms. Today's program on fundamentals has several objectives, all of which are contained in your participant guide. Ultimately, however, our focus is on how to use the net worth statement and monthly cash flow statement and the desk reference, not only to calculate monthly cash flow and net worth, but also to use those to figure out ability to pay and to create realistic payment schedules. Now, you'll probably find it helpful to have two things in front of you: the Financial Investigation Desk Reference itself and the participant guide for this program. Also, over the course of the program, if you have a question, suggestion, tip, or if we've missed something, please fax us at 1-800-488-0397. Now let's get the ball rolling here with our first panel discussion. We're going to start talking about where the system is now and how it got there. And joining me to do that are three people who know a little something about it. First, Sharon Geiter, Senior U.S. Probation Officer from the Northern District of Texas. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
Clayton Foster, incoming Deputy Chief Probation Officer from the District of New Hampshire. Welcome, Clay.
Thank you.
And finally, John Hertig, Supervising U.S. Probation Officer from the District of Massachusetts. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Mark.
Now, we've gotten to where we are through a series of legislative and policy developments over a period of years. Sharon, why don't you start us off by talking about some of the most important legislative developments?
Okay, Mark. There's really three legislative acts that are real significant for financial investigations. The first one is the Criminal Fines and Enforcement Act of 1984. In that act, maximum felony fines were set at $250,000 and misdemeanors at $100,000. That act also allowed us to collect interest on fines. Now, the second really important piece of legislation is the Federal Debt Collection Act of 1990. That act gave us additional enforcement remedies, and it also allowed the government to retain the pre-sentence report for collection procedures. And really the third key piece there is the Mandatory Victim Restitution Act of 1996. In that act, one of the key components is that it allowed mandatory restitution on certain kinds of crimes. It also allowed us to collect for non-governmental victims. And finally, it allowed a 20-year liability for collection of restitution after a period of incarceration or with the death of an offender.
All right. Now, we've got the law. Now, let's turn to the policy. Clay, talk to us again about the policy developments over this period of years that we've been talking about.
All right, Mark. While Congress was enacting the laws that Sharon just mentioned, the Government Accounting Office was conducting a series of investigations to determine how the Department of Justice and U.S. Probation had been implementing their aspects of those laws. Now, in 1985, the GAO report came out, and what they found was that the quantity and the quality of the financial information that was being gathered on a defendant for the court varied a great deal, and not only among districts, but also among officers within the same office. And they thought that a more thorough, verified form of information needed to be developed. So the Administrative Office set up a financial task force in around 1987 to create a collection-based approach to give the officers, to give them some structure on how to collect this financial information. Now, this task force was made up of the FJC, several U.S. probation officers who had substantial financial investigation experience, and members of the EAO. Their approach was to take this collection-based idea and come up with a multi-part curriculum for it. They did that, and by 1988, that program had been implemented across the districts, each district having sent an officer to the FJC for training to bring it back to their district. In 1992, the FJC, as they were looking at how they could increase training and the effectiveness, decided to tweak that original training process, and they wanted to add additional skills and increase the fundamental skills of the officer and bring in some more advanced skills and training. So, and what they did is they got together another group of experts in the system, and that resulted in our financial desk reference that all of us are familiar with today.
Okay, so how did we got to the desk reference. How did we get to the 114?
Okay. The GAO continued to investigate both the DLJ and U.S. Probation Office, and in 1998, their report came out on how the U.S. Probation Office was doing a very poor job on structuring payment schedules for individuals with fines and restitution payments. They found that the officers were very uncomfortable on making payment schedules. In fact, I'll bring you back to the vignette that started this program of Poor Officer Smith. That's not that far from the truth. Many officers felt that way, and like most people, if you're not comfortable with the situation, you find a way around it. And people were taking shortcuts. The easiest method was the one that they used. The GAO report recommended that a policy be established that gave a great deal of guidance to probation officers on how to set appropriate collection methods and payment schedules for the offenders. And that resulted in a group being placed together again and the development of the monograph 114, which really ties both the desk reference with the how to do it with the policy as why you do it, which for probation officers has always been very important. We like to know why we're doing something, not just that we have to do it.
Excellent. Okay, so now, John, we've got a package. We've got the 114, the desk reference, we've got the law and the policy together, and the training materials. Talk a little, now obviously there's been impact on the responsibility of the officer with regard to financial investigation. Briefly talk about those formal responsibilities and then how that relates to the desk reference approach.
Well, in addition to our statutory authority, we receive our guidance from the monograph 107 for pre-sentence investigations, the 109 for supervision, the 114, and the desk reference, as you mentioned. The desk reference focuses on an approach of what to get, where to get it, and what to do with it. When you're looking at what to get, you want to utilize things such as the Form 48 or 48EZ, which are the net worth statement, or the 48B, the monthly cash flow statement. When you're looking at where to get it, you can utilize the defendant, financial institutions or professionals, credit checks, or different public databases such as ChoicePoint or LexisNexis. When you're trying to figure out what to do with it from the pre-sentence perspective, you want to verify and analyze all the information. You want to recommend a lump sum payment and methods to pay that. You want to recommend a payment schedule, and you want to include all the information in the pre-sentence report. In terms of supervision, again, you want to verify and analyze all the information, make any recommendations for a lump sum payment and any methods to pay that off, recommendations for changes in the payment schedule, if at all possible, facilitate the collection, and do an ongoing monitoring of the individual's financial status throughout the course of supervision.
Excellent. All right, now folks, you've heard about this mantra, what to get, where to get it, and what to do with it. And that's something that we're going to be coming back to over the course of this program and over the course of the remainder of the Financial Investigation Series programs. That's the approach taken in the desk reference, and in a few minutes, we're going to apply that approach to a practical scenario. Before that, however, we thought it would be helpful for you all to take a look at an interview that we conducted recently, a taped interview we've conducted recently with Assistant U.S. Attorney Tamara Fine, who was the attorney advisor to her district's financial litigation unit. That interview takes about 12 minutes, so take a look at that, and then we'll be back with the case of Anita Loan. Tamara Fine, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
First, because we've got several new officers in the audience, and they may just be becoming familiar with the structure of the federal system and their U.S. Attorney's Office, could you describe generally what the Financial Litigation Unit is, what it does, and more particularly, how it works with probation officers?
The Financial Litigation Office, which is usually referred to as the FLU, is responsible for collecting all debts owed to the United States, essentially. They're responsible for collecting civil judgments and civil settlements, and they're responsible for collecting all of what we call criminal monetary impositions. Those are the criminal aspects of rather the monetary aspects of a criminal judgment, such as fines and restitution. The relationship with probation offices varies across the country. I'm lucky enough to be on the evaluation team that evaluates U.S. Attorney's offices across the country, and I have an opportunity to look at a lot of FLUs, and some of them work extremely closely with probation offices, some less closely. I think that all are moving toward a closer relationship because we are all part of the same team. We're all charged with collecting, particularly restitution, fines as well, and the communication between the probation office and the FLU can really make the difference between collecting, particularly the restitution, and not collecting it.
You mentioned communication, and I want to stay on that topic for a second. What advice do you have for officers in terms of communication with the FLU as they conduct a financial investigation, both at the pre-sentence stage and at the supervision stage? I know that most of our audience is probably at least a little familiar with what happens at the supervision stage, but perhaps less so at the pre-sentence stage. So let's talk about that. And what information does the FLU need most from the officer in order to do your job?
Well, I think a lot of what the FLU needs is just information that stands out in the officer's mind. An example that I've given based upon a pre-sentence report that actually crossed my desk when I was a flu attorney advisor was an individual who had stolen through fraud about $2 million. But the pre-sentence financial investigation reflected that he owned a TV and a VCR, and that was it. That doesn't make sense. And that's the time when you're going to want to get your financial litigation unit involved, as well as your criminal AUSA. At the pre-sentence level, when you find either an uncooperative defendant, that is a defendant who refuses to provide any information, a defendant who provides information that appears on its face to be implausible, or a defendant that has information about assets, you're going to want to contact the criminal AUSA and the flu unit. The criminal AUSA has at his disposal the investigative agents that worked on the case on the liability aspects, and he's going to be able, he or she's going to be able to tell you what they've discovered in their financial investigation, and quite possibly conduct an investigation if there's little or no cooperation from the defendant. If assets are discovered, you're going to want to tell the criminal AUSA about them, because it's an opportunity for the criminal AUSA to then tell the court, here are assets that are available to satisfy this debt. I've seen cases where the court has actually ordered defendants to liquidate specific assets to pay debts. I've also seen situations in which defendants have agreed to liquidate assets that were discovered in a pre-sentence investigation. The pre-sentence investigation also is a good tool for flu to use to be on the alert. Prior to the entry of a judgment, flu can actually be substantially involved in a case, but it needs to know when there are assets out there that it needs to act immediately to preserve and protect.
Okay, so not only should officers look to the flu and the criminal AUSA as assistance and for assistance in helping in cases that are particularly difficult, as you said, for example, in cases where the defendant is uncooperative or is being counseled by defense counsel not to cooperate for reasons, whatever the reasons are.
Right.
That you're there to help. Okay.
That's right.
But that second point that you mentioned, that how helpful a pre-sentence investigation that does cover, that does have a thorough financial investigation sort of as part of it, can be helpful to you in helping you carrying out your job.
Absolutely, both from the criminal AUSA's perspective and most importantly from the flu's perspective. The flu may receive dozens of new cases in any given day, and it needs to know when there's a case that needs immediate attention. A flu unit may well have a caseload that's topping 4,000 or 5,000 cases, and if it has a new case where there's a potential for a loss of assets, for assets to be secreted or to be dissipated in some fashion, it needs to know that right out of the gate.
Okay. Now, in carrying out your function, what kinds of tools do you have available what kind of tools are at your disposal to assist officers in their collection efforts?
Well, I think that perhaps one of the most overlooked tools, but by far the most important, is the judgment lien. Within a few days after receiving a criminal judgment, the flu unit puts a lien in place. And that lien acts like a tax lien. It attaches to property and rights to property, so it's a very all-encompassing lien. That lien essentially sits there and takes the pulse of that debtor, the financial pulse of the debtor, for a period of many years. It will result in the flu being notified if the assets are being transferred, if the assets are being, for example, a piece of real estate is being refinanced, if equity is being extracted from it in some fashion. And so that's an important tool that's going to be out there working even when you don't see it. There are also a lot of collection avenues available to flu, as well as informational avenues. Let's talk about information first before you've located an asset. Say you have a debtor that's not being cooperative, won't fill out a financial affidavit. Well, the flu has an opportunity, a right, in fact, to take that debtor's deposition. That is, if he won't fill out a sworn financial statement for his probation officer, he can come into the U.S. Attorney's Office and he can have a sworn deposition taken. And
can that be done at the pre-sentence level and the supervision level, or just the supervision level?
That needs to be done after there's a judgment in place. So, in addition, if the debtor decides that he doesn't want to cooperate with the deposition, he can be brought into before a magistrate judge and have his deposition taken there, which is a far less pleasant experience.
Right. Very good.
So that's one way. There are wage garnishments. The Treasury offset program is in place so that if a debtor is out earning an income and entitled to a refund from the IRS, that's going to be seized automatically and applied to the criminal debt. There are levies against property. And then there are some more unusual tools that we sometimes use. For example, I remember a case where a debtor knew that there was a lien on his real estate property, so he began to cut down the trees and sell them, greatly decreasing the value of this waterfront property. And we were able to go in and get that stopped by the use of a TRO, or a temporary restraining order. What that essentially does is stops the conduct on a temporary basis until the court can consider a more permanent injunction against the activity. So you have a wide range of opportunities both to gather information that could be helpful to the probation office and to take action if the probation office or if those depositions show that there are assets out there that are being secreted or transferred or dissipated in some fashion.
Excellent. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I wanted to ask you two particular questions that come up often, that are raised often by probation officers. First, what if a defendant files for bankruptcy? How does that trigger work with your office, and what can an officer do?
Well, the first thing the officer should do is take a deep breath and not panic. And the second he should do is call his flu unit. In most U.S. attorneys' offices, the flus are connected with the civil division. If not, obviously they're within the same office. And there's a civil division attorney who's very conversant with bankruptcy, you can be certain. The flu will be responsible for stopping any collection activity in the short term, because that's barred by the automatic stay. But will also be responsible for filing a proof of claim if that's appropriate. In the bankruptcy, that's not the probation officer's obligation or duty. That's something the flu will do. And will also be responsible for defending the non-dischargeability of that debt were that to become an issue. So a call to the flu and getting the flu and the bankruptcy attorney involved is the best way that the probation officer can breathe a sigh of relief and know that he doesn't have to.
So don't panic.
Don't
call
panic.
your flu.
That's correct.
Okay. Last question. Several districts across the country have developed memoranda of understanding, or MOUs, and in fact, there's a sample MOU that for probation offices, the clerk's office, and the assistant U.S. attorney, or the U.S. attorney's office, available in monograph 114 for offices to use as a model. What do you think about the use of the memorandum of understanding as a way of establishing a relationship with a flu and sustaining a relationship with a flu?
I think it's a great opportunity to sustain a relationship. I think that an MOU, or memorandum of understanding, probably doesn't really work to establish a relationship, but it can be the sort of gateway to establishing the relationship. Our district has an MOU, many districts do, but what we found is that it merely memorializes an existing relationship. It can't really create one out of whole cloth. We took the opportunity of wanting to do an MOU to do cross-training with probation in the clerk's office, to have meetings, a brown bag luncheon or something, where representatives of all the departments would come. They would talk about issues. So many times there's something that one office is doing that's creating a huge headache for another office. And it's just a matter of communicating. The solution can sometimes be very, very simple. But if you've got that sort of communication going, then that gives you the information you need to very effectively propose an MOU that's not going to stumble upon some minefield somewhere that's going to make it more difficult to establish a relationship that you need. And really the relationship and the communication is the key to success in collection.
So you're saying go forward, establish the relationship, start working as a team, and then over the course of time try to develop a memorandum of understanding with your counterparts.
I think that's right. It's part of the process, but it's not necessarily the start, but just part of the fruition of those efforts.
Excellent. Tamara Fine, thanks again.
Thank you.
Welcome back. For this segment, I'm joined in the studio by U.S. Probation Officer Brad Vaughn of the Middle District of Florida. Brad, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And on the phone, we're joined by 5 officers who are also experts in financial investigation, and they are Sentencing Guidelines Specialist Gary Paradise from the District of South Carolina, U.S. Probation Officer Jeff Gwynn from the Southern District of West Virginia, Sentencing Guidelines Specialist Catherine Gomez from the Southern District of Florida, Senior U.S. Probation Officer Lou Queso from the Eastern District of New York, and U.S. Probation Officer David Ball from the Western District of New York. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. Hey, Mark.
In this segment, John and Sharon are going to play the roles of an officer and an offender, respectively, as we work through the case of Anita Lone. In this scenario we've created, the officer is conducting a financial interview of the offender, Ms. Lone, at the beginning of her term of supervised release. We'll stop periodically for discussion throughout the scenario, and we'll loosely follow the issues raised by the discussion questions that are contained in your participant guide. And I should say, all of the materials for this exercise are contained in your participant guide, the background facts as well as the forms. Brad and all of the panelists will take their opportunities to comment on what we've seen as we go through the scenario. Now, even though the interview takes place in the supervision context, we're equally concerned with the pre-sentence context. So we will refer to that whenever it makes sense. If we miss something, please send us a fax and bring it to our attention, and we will bring it up toward the end of the broadcast, time permitting. What we want to do with this exercise is demonstrate the basic financial investigation approach that's contained in the desk reference, and we want to reveal the reasoning underlying each step of the investigation process. So we're very concerned with process in this exercise. Okay, before we get into the actual scenario in which the officer has already obtained from the offender the completed Form 48 and Form 48B, we need to first talk briefly about the kinds of preparation an officer needs to do prior to meeting with the offender. So Brad, how do you prepare for this kind of an interview?
First, you start out with a database investigation using LexisNexis, ChoicePoint, items that we can find that would verify who Anita Lone is, information that she has given to us. It will help us verify her property, real property, vehicle information. We would also be real interested in getting her credit report and reviewing that prior to meeting with her so that we can see who she owes money to, establish her liabilities. It will also give us a picture of her lifestyle and her financial ability to pay a fine. It's going to show us who has claims against her resources.
So you're going to know that stuff before you even meet with her?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, compare and contrast very briefly the pre-sentence approach versus the supervision approach.
At the pre-sentence report level, we're going to want to identify victims, assets, liabilities that she has, report those to the court. It's really going to underscore what we do for the court so that it can adequately give an order of restitution, whether a lump payment is possible and monthly payments thereafter. Supervision level, they're going to use that PSR as a baseline from which to work to establish what she has, dig a little deeper, and go after those resources so to make the victim whole.
Okay. Well, without further ado, let's get started. The officer greets Ms. Lone and begins the interview.
Hey, Ms. Lone, thanks for coming in and completing the Form 48 and 48B. As I mentioned before, we need to go over this form line by line in order to determine what a payment schedule is going to be. Any questions?
No, not yet.
Well, let's take a look at the top of the statement, starting with the section under bank accounts. Did you bring your bank statements?
No, I didn't know you needed those.
Ma'am, as indicated in the instructions on the form, we need verification for everything. As soon as possible, you need to provide me with your bank statements for the past 3 months.
Oh, all right.
Now, is that the account your husband withdrew the $30,000 from?
You know, I'm not sure. I really don't know what he did with the money while I was gone.
Well, it appears that there's a $30,000 difference between what was reported when the PSR was completed with what you've provided with me here.
Well, I know he did something with the money. I guess I'll just try to find out.
Well, in that case, I'm going to need you to provide me with the statements from the time you were incarcerated up until the present date.
Okay.
But presently, there's a $12,000 balance?
Yes, that's right.
And for which you have 50% of?
Yes.
Great. And going on to the checking account, there's a, which you also hold jointly with your husband, there's a $5,000 balance. Again, I'm going to need the statements for that going back from the time you're incarcerated. And that one statement should have both your checking account and your savings account information.
Okay.
Well, how do you and your husband typically handle your bank statements?
Oh, we usually look at them and then just throw them away.
Do you do any online banking?
No.
Well, if you don't have access to any of the records online, you need to contact your bank immediately and obtain those for me. And if you're unable to do so, I'll have you complete a release of information so I can get it myself.
Okay.
Going on to the next account, the Sun Trust account. You indicate that's owned solely by your husband, and there's presently a $25,000 balance in it?
That's what he told me.
Okay, ma'am. Again, I'm going to need verification that that's solely your husband's account and that it's only been his.
But, you know, I'm the one responsible for this. Does he really have to provide you financial information?
Well, we need to take a look at the entire financial picture of the whole family to determine what assets are readily available to make any lump sum, if possible, because we need to get the payment down. You need to keep in mind that we're not looking to put your family in any financial harm or dire straits, but we have an obligation to the court to collect the restitution in full. That's one of our primary responsibilities.
All right, Brad. We're still in what to get mode here. We've got the completed 48 and the completed 48B, but that's not enough. We're focused in that exchange on verification. Talk a little bit about that.
The probation officer gave her very clear, specific instructions. He established what we need and why we need it, what's expected of her and what she can expect from us. It clarified our position and hopefully left no doubt in her mind what we're doing and why we're doing it.
And in fact, those instructions are contained in the forms that the offender takes with her to fill out.
That's correct. There's no gray area there.
Right, okay. Let's go out to our remote panelists, particularly Lou Queso in the Eastern District of New York. There was a reference there to the pre-sentence report. So could you talk about sort of the relationship of the pre-sentence report and the importance of accurate financial information in that to the beginning, particularly, of supervision?
Well, Mark, what I do in an investigation such as this is I read the financial section of the pre-sentence report and I compare that information to what's being provided to me now, presently, on this interview, and I try to clarify any discrepancies between the information contained in the PSR and what's being told to me now. I also try to compare, re-verify the information that's in the PSI, just in case there was anything that wasn't covered previously.
Okay, so we can't sort of underscore enough the importance of that relationship between the pre-sentence report and its value to the supervision officer. Brad, any reaction to that briefly?
No, you're absolutely correct. That's what we're after, and that's why we set this up as a baseline for the supervision officer to work from at a later date.
Okay, there are a few other issues in there, but let's move ahead to Section C on the 48, money owed to you by others, and the interview continues.
Under the next section, money owed to you by others, you didn't indicate anything there, correct?
Right. I don't think anybody owes me money.
Well, what about your husband? Does anybody owe him money?
I don't think so.
Well, for future reference, ma'am, any time a particular section doesn't apply to you, you need to indicate that by writing the word none.
Okay.
Going to the next section, life insurance. You have one policy. Does your husband have one?
Well, I think he's the beneficiary of my policy.
Beneficiary of yours. Are you the beneficiary of his?
Well, I think so. You know, we did that a long time ago.
Do you have it with you today?
No, but I can find that.
Well, I need you to bring that with you next week. I also need you to bring all the financial information pertaining to those life insurance policies for your husband.
Okay.
Under the next section regarding safety deposit boxes, ma'am, you identify one box.
Right. It's at SunTrust Bank.
And what's in it?
Oh, just some family jewelry.
Like what?
Oh, some rings my mother gave me. They're not very important.
Well, where'd you come up with this $5,000 figure? Have you ever had it assessed?
No, I just guessed.
Well, how do you know if it's valuable or not?
Well, my mom didn't have much money, so I just figured at the max it would be $5,000.
Do you have the rental agreement with you?
Yes, I have the rental agreement.
Well, thank you. Do you have an inventory of the contents?
No, but I'll go through and write it all down.
Well, I'm also going to need you to sign a release form so that I can see the entry log for the box, so that I can determine who's gone to the box and when.
You need to know when I go to the bank?
Not necessarily the bank, ma'am, but I need to know when and how often you go to the box.
All right.
And under the next section, your family has 2 motor vehicles?
Yes.
And the Accord is yours?
Yeah, that's my car.
Is it paid in full?
Yes.
And you've identified a fair market value of $3,000?
I think it's 3,000.
Well, where'd you come up with that?
Well, I just looked in the paper, and Accord seemed to be running about 3,000.
So you didn't use the Blue Book value or anything?
No.
And what about the 2002 Lexus? When did your husband obtain that?
Well, he bought that car right before I went to prison.
Well, prior to you leaving for prison, did you or your husband have any conversations regarding the financial situation of the family and what he was going to do while you were away?
Well, he was a little concerned there wouldn't be enough money because I wouldn't be working.
Well, if he was concerned, why would he take on the responsibility of such a high-priced vehicle?
Well, it was important to have a reliable vehicle. You know, we had to get the kids back and forth to school, and, you know, we didn't want a car that would be breaking down.
Well, what was he driving before that?
You know, I think it was a Chevy.
Well, we're going to have to take a closer look at that because a Lexus is a pretty high-priced vehicle, and it doesn't make much sense when the family's financial picture was so unclear. Was the Lexus a purchase or a lease?
No, we bought it.
Well, do you have the sales agreement for it?
Yeah, here's another folder. It's got all kinds of car stuff in it. You can look through that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to look through it before you leave, but if it doesn't contain the information that I need, I'm going to ask you to bring it back with you next week.
All right, Brad, we're still in the what to get mode, but we're inching into the where to get it. And I'm particularly curious about this notion of finding objective valuation of assets, not just sort of taking the offender's word for it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We're going to want an objective method for valuation of assets, a Kelly Blue Book value, a property appraiser's web page, something that we can get a number from other than a best guesstimate from the offender of the offense.
Okay, so you've mentioned basically over the course of our conversation already 3 sources of information. One is the offender, one is databases, and one is sources like the Kelly Blue Book and sort of specific objective sources that you can use for particular types of assets.
That's correct. Those are going to give us real numbers that we can work with through the term of first supervised release.
Okay. The other issue I want to talk about, and I think is important here, and this goes out to David Ball in the Western District of New York. David, talk a little bit. In that exchange, we heard a little bit about the types of considerations that go into the families and the offenders' financial decision-making process and their lifestyle. What are your reactions to that?
Well, I think the officer asked very good questions. She wasn't really clear on why they decided to purchase the vehicle when they knew that she was going to be incarcerated for a while. I would want to know why they thought they could afford this vehicle if he was concerned about some of the financial concerns they had. I guess the other issue, if you examine the financial statement itself, there's only a $16,000 balance left on the vehicle. That would kind of be indicative of a substantial down payment, perhaps, when they purchased the vehicle, or cause concern as to what other assets they might have to think that they could afford that.
Excellent. Let me ask you, Brad, coming back into the studio, about, just very briefly, the relationship of those kinds of decisions regarding assets to monthly cash flow.
It will have an impact. You're talking about a high-end vehicle with a $400 or $500 a month car payment versus maybe a paid-off vehicle or 2 paid-off vehicles. Prior to her incarceration, the loss of a second family income and certainly the family's financial picture in jeopardy, it will have an impact in that $200 or $300 a month could be realized by a lesser vehicle.
Okay, so you can't look at the 48 and the 48B individually or each in a vacuum. You've got to look at them as interacting with each other and ultimately how they affect each other.
That's correct. We would dig deeper and find ways to help the offender with payments in the future.
Excellent. Okay. Still, other issues remain, but those are some of the important ones. Moving right along, we're going to move to Section G of the 48 on real estate, and the interview continues.
All right, Ms. Sloan, under the real estate section, you've identified 2 properties. The one at 4000 Canal Street, is that your primary residence?
Yes.
And you purchased that in '95?
That's right.
Have you refinanced it at all?
No, we haven't.
So that's the original mortgage balance?
That's correct.
Okay, then you've purchased it for $150,000. The current balance is $120,000. You have monthly payments of $1,300, and you estimate the fair market value to be $225,000?
Well, you know, prices have really gone up in the last couple of years.
Well, where'd you get the fair market value from?
Those are just some houses in my neighborhood. That's what they've sold for.
That's what they've been going for?
Yeah, but you're not going to take my house, are you?
At this point, ma'am, all I'm trying to do is get a fix on your financial picture, and that's really all you need to be concerned about. Did you bring the original closing statement with you?
Well, I brought the housing folder.
Great. Again, I'll take a look through this, but if it doesn't contain the documents that I need, I'm going to be asking you to bring that back with you next week.
All right. Now, I've got another house.
Okay, that's the property, the Key Largo property at 42 M Street?
Right, but that's my rent house.
What do you mean, rent house?
Well, I rent it out.
How'd you obtain that house?
I bought it.
You bought it solely without your husband?
Well, I was working then.
What funds did you use to purchase it?
Well, you know, my marriage was a little shaky then, and I thought that I might need some place to live, so I just used my own money and I bought it.
Does your husband own any property solely?
Not that I know of.
So you purchased that residence for $85,000. It has a current balance of $70,000. You have a monthly payment of $725, and you estimate the fair market value to be $120,000?
Yeah, that's right.
What type of residence is it?
Oh, it's a lot smaller than our house. It's 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath. It's a little house.
Is it rented throughout the year?
Well, I have renters in it right now.
And how much do you get for rent?
Oh, I put it on that other form, that cash flow form. Something around $1,000.
A little over $1,000?
I actually get $1,105.
Well, is it furnished or unfurnished?
It's unfurnished.
So you have approximately $50,000 in equity in it.
Now, you're not going to take my rent house, too, are you?
Well, ma'am, we're not going to take anything. But like I said before, what we are going to do is look at your entire financial picture and make a determination as to how to pay this restitution figure off the best way we can, okay?
All right, Brad. We are still in what to get and where to get it, but we're getting closer into the what to do with it mode. Talk to us about the real estate assets and how that might play into thinking about your thinking, just as the officer in this process, about that sort of immediate payment.
Sure. I'm going to want an objective valuation of assets. We're going to examine the possibility of removing the equity from her residences, her rental properties, to possibly form some kind of lump sum payment or adjust her monthly payment to a figure where she can pay more based on what she has and what she can liquidate.
Okay. Now, going out again to our remote panelists in the field, Gary Paradise from the District of South Carolina, we started to see, or continued to see in that exchange, a little bit of defensiveness and resistance on the part of the offender, of Ms. Lone, especially when it came to talking about her residence and her rent house, and are you going to take that from me, as well as, again, you know, her financial decision-making types of process. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think in this situation, first the officer is going to have to make it clear to Ms. Anita Lone that the officer has to weigh the difference between the lump sum payment obtained through a home equity loan on the investment property and using the income generated from the property to make monthly restitution payments. Some issues that come up there, encumbering the investment property with a second mortgage will reduce the amount of cash flow available to her as there's another loan payment to be made each month. Obviously, this will affect her ability to make larger monthly restitution payments. I think it's important to advise Ms. Lone that our intentions are not to take her property, but to determine an appropriate method of making the victim whole.
Excellent. I mean, I like the point that you made at first about, again, reminding us of about the relationship between assets and cash flow, and that they relate to each other, so you can't make decisions about immediate payments without understanding the impact on the monthly cash flow and the types of options that might be available. Brad, any quick reactions to that?
The offender is going to have to come to the realization that she's going to face some lifestyle changes, and the things that she may have been used to with respect to her financial lifestyle are going to have to change.
Okay. All right, moving right along. And again, folks, if you want us to cover something, or we've missed something, or you can think of something that we should cover here, send us a fax and we'll try to get to it at the end of the broadcast. Lots of issues are coming up. We're going to skip ahead now in the interview and turn to Section L, income tax returns, and the subsequent asset sections, and then get into the section on liabilities.
Ma'am, the last year you filed income taxes was when?
2000, right before I went to prison.
And has your husband filed since you've been incarcerated?
Yes, I think he filed separately.
Individual returns?
Right.
Okay, I'm going to ask that you provide me a copy of those.
Okay, I'll look for those.
Also, I'd like to know what's been happening with all the dividend, interest, and rental income while you've been incarcerated.
Well, my husband's been taking care of the finances. I think he's been putting it in the savings account.
Okay, well, I'm going to need to see the tax returns that the two of you filed jointly, as well as his individual return. Now, in the next section, the transfer of assets, you've indicated that you haven't done any, correct?
That's right.
Okay, prior to your incarceration, did you and your husband make any financial plans in terms of transferring any assets? And even before your incarceration, the indictment stage?
No, I was pretty scared. We didn't do anything.
Nothing?
Well, no, I put as a signatory on some of my accounts, but just so he could have access. But we didn't transfer anything or give anything away.
Who took care of the finances prior to your incarceration?
Well, usually I did.
Well, then you should have a pretty good knowledge of what was going on.
Well, I tried.
Well, ma'am, it's a little difficult for me to believe that you don't know the status of these accounts prior to your incarceration. I understand that it must have been a very troubling time, but typically when things like this happen and someone has been handling the household finances and they have experience dealing with money, they typically make arrangements. I'm sure that you were worried about what was going to happen with your husband and your children, so again, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'm going to remind you about your obligation to answer these questions truthfully. Did you transfer any assets?
No.
All right. Under the next section, number of shareholders or partners regarding any ownership, you've indicated none?
That's right.
And the next one regarding assets you will liquidate. This includes all assets you intend to liquidate to satisfy the outstanding financial obligation. You've put the word unknown.
Well, I couldn't think of anything that I wanted to sell.
Well, then how do you plan to repay the restitution?
I'm just going to do the best I can.
Which is?
Well, I thought I'd just pay a little bit out of each paycheck.
Well, right, but that's not going to satisfy the financial obligation.
Well, so where do we get the rest?
Well, we're going to look at a variety of things. We're identifying your assets and your liabilities, and I advised you that I need certain verifying documentation to confirm what you said here is accurate, to determine what your net worth is. Then, whether there's any money available from your assets to get this restitution balance done. You do have some cash assets in your savings and checking accounts, a piece of property that you own solely, as well as another couple of things. We're going to take a look at it to determine if any of it can be used. And again, I need to remind you that we're not looking to put your family in dire straits, but you need to make a good faith effort to pay off this restitution.
Well, you know, I do have 2 credit cards that we could use.
And you've indicated that those credit cards are held jointly with you and your husband, correct?
That's right.
And what's the current balance on those?
You know, I think it's about $3,000 each.
So $6,000 total, and your husband relied on these while you were incarcerated?
You know, I think he used it sometimes for groceries or stuff for the kids.
Well, why would he use the credit cards if you had ample savings?
I don't know. I don't know what he bought to make it so high.
Well, again, as I said about the bank statements, I'd like to see these credit card statements from the time you were incarcerated.
Okay.
Now, you indicate that the minimum monthly payment is $150. Is that the minimum you pay, or is that the minimum that's identified on the bill?
Well, that's what we pay.
Well, what's the minimum identified on the bill?
You know, I think it's $35 or $45.
On each one?
That's right.
So why do you choose to pay $150?
Well, we're just trying to keep it manageable.
Well, I understand that, ma'am, but now you have a significant financial obligation, which in my opinion is a little bit more important than your credit card debt. So we need to rethink your approach. Certainly we want you to stay current with the credit card payments, but I think you should only be making the minimum payments.
All right, Brad. We're going to talk to Jeff Gwynn out in the field in a moment about the tax returns, but let me turn to you and address that issue of asset transfers. We saw an exchange between the officer and the offender about inquiring about, you know, whether there had been financial arrangements made, whether there had been any asset transfers. Why is that such an important question to ask, and what's your reaction to it in this specific scenario?
It is important to ask. We're going to want to establish what was done by the offender and anyone else who may have been associated with the offense, and finding out where the money went, what it went for, and how possibly we can recover it.
Okay. Now, in terms of where this offender is coming from and her potential for making financial arrangements and moving assets around, react to that, if you would.
Well, it's important to note that the officer established early, and here again in that snippet, the offender's first obligation and responsibility is to make the victim whole and follow the order by the court for her restitution amounts.
I mean, we're not dealing with an uneducated person here. We don't know much about her background in terms of the specifics, but we know that she knows something she knows a little something about handling money, and that she's got this restitution order that she's going to have to fulfill.
Right. It's kind of a bait and switch. A bookkeeper who doesn't know where the money went. I was gone. We made a purchase. I don't know where it went. I'm not sure of things.
Right.
There's some
so
gray
it's
area
going
there.
to pique your interest.
Absolutely.
Okay. Out to Jeff Gwynn now, Southern District of West Virginia. Jeff is not only a U.S. probation officer, but our resident certified public accountant. So he gets to answer the questions about tax returns, but not give us too much information because we're going to get into it in later programs. Jeff, beginning of the scenario, or that segment of the scenario, there was interaction about tax returns. Tell us about their importance, particularly with regard to verification.
Okay. The tax returns are very important. Especially in the case of this loan, first thing I would start doing is looking at the various schedules, mainly based on what we know, the Schedule B, which would include information on interest and dividends, and also the Schedule E, which would include the rental income. Okay. We need to take that information and compare it with what she's reported on the Probe 48, and it should be easily verifiable whether that's consistent.
Excellent. And as I say, in future programs, we'll get more deeply into the wherewithal and the ups and downs of dealing with tax returns. But for now, that's basically what we need to know. Jeff, could you also comment very briefly on this notion of the credit cards and what that tells us about this offender?
Okay. Well, the credit cards, it's obvious from what she's indicated, she's paying a lot more than the minimum payment. The credit report would, in addition to the statements she would provide, the credit report would indicate a minimum monthly payment, and we need to explain to her that the excess should be paid toward the restitution. If she is unable to make the payments on the credit, on her credit cards and things like that, we could. I've recommended in the past various nonprofit agencies help work out arrangements with credit card companies where maybe she could reduce or eliminate interest on the cards, where she could lower her payment but yet pay the card off in a earlier time frame.
Excellent. Okay, let's move forward and continue to get further into this liabilities section, now talking about the civil suits and bankruptcies. The interview continues.
Now, continuing with the form, in the liabilities section under other debts, you have identified the 2 mortgage loans. And under the section regarding civil suits, there's a Terrace Trace Apartments. Why don't you tell me a little about that?
Well, we were kind of having a tough time, and we didn't pay our rent for a couple months, and so we just moved out, and they sued us.
Well, what happened with the judgment?
I think it's still there. We've never paid it.
Do you know if they've put a lien on any of the properties?
You know, I don't know.
Do you have any of the documentation pertaining to the suit?
Well, I've got this thing. This is all what they sent us in the mail. I never really read it.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to take a look at this. And under the next one, the bankruptcy filings, it appears you filed for Chapter 7 in '90?
That's right.
And what brought that on?
Well, we were just young and irresponsible, and we ended up in a lot of debt, so we did what everybody else does. We just filed bankruptcy.
Do you have the documents pertaining to the bankruptcy?
Not with me. I think they're in a box in the garage.
Well, when do you plan on looking for that, ma'am?
I'll do it tonight.
Well, I need you to call me tomorrow with that, because if you're unable to get those, I'm going to need to get them from myself from the court. Okay?
Well, I've kept a list here of all the stuff I'm supposed to bring back, so I'll bring the bankruptcy documents too.
Thank you.
All right, Brad. We're now sort of talking not only about civil suits, but about bankruptcies, and particularly about the potential impact of a lien. The officer asked about whether there were any liens on their property or that kind of thing. Talk about the potential impact of a lien on real property and the connection of that to making a lump sum payment or cash flow or whatever.
Sure. It's going to show us who might also have claims against her assets through liens on property, bankruptcy filings, things that were discharged. It's also going to create for us a pattern. We'll get a chance to look into maybe how she deals with her financial self by what she's done in the past.
Okay, let's go out to the field to Catherine Gomez in the Southern District of Florida. Catherine, if you could, if you have any reactions to this notion of the impact of liens from civil suits on property, or certainly the notion of bankruptcies and what looking into past bankruptcy records of an offender can help, how that can help with the officer's investigation.
Well, with respect to any liens that might be filed against any properties that the defendant owns, it would certainly impact the equity that would be in that property and the amount of money that they would be able to liquidate in order to pay toward the restitution. With respect to the bankruptcy, this particular bankruptcy was filed a number of years prior to, I believe about a decade prior to her committing the offense. Obviously, the sooner that the bankruptcy was filed, the more useful the information is going to be to you because it's more recent.
Right.
However, you can order the bankruptcy file if the defendant doesn't have a copy of their petition, and review the petition. There's a very comprehensive list of all of the assets and liabilities that the defendant had at the time that they filed, and also a breakdown of their income and their expenses at that time. Since this information is so old, it's probably not quite as useful, but I think at the very least you can get an idea of the kind of spending habits that they had. If the defendant had discharged, say, $150,000 worth of credit card debt, I think you have a pretty good indication. You might want to keep a good look at on their expenditures.
That's a good point, because I was thinking about sort of taken as a whole, sort of the whole picture here, the combination of the bankruptcies and the civil suit, and then the decision making about credit cards and buying the Lexus. That should tell us something, no?
I agree, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Moving right along, we're now going to switch gears and get to the 48B, the monthly cash flow statement. John and Ms. Lone will review the monthly cash flow statement as the interview continues.
You filled out the long monthly cash flow statement, and I'd like to go over that. Starting with the top, under the set wages and salaries, you indicate a gross income of $3,800 and a net income of $3,200.
Yes, that's right.
And where are you employed?
I'm a bookkeeper for my brother.
Are you paid hourly or by salary?
No, I'm salary.
Did you bring a pay stub?
Well, here, I brought you the last one.
Thank you. You're not contributing to any retirement right now, are you?
No, but he said we could set that up later on.
Well, that's a great option to have. However, I'm going to ask that you not contribute to any retirement at this time until your obligation is paid in full. You indicate that you don't receive any cash advances or bonuses?
Well, no, I just started working for him when I got out, but he said if I needed money, I could borrow some.
Well, would that be work-related, or would you just simply be able to borrow from him? Was there a limit on that?
Oh, maybe just a couple $100 here and there.
What about a larger lump sum figure?
No, my brother doesn't have that kind of money.
Okay, well, again, I'm going to ask that you not take out any personal loans from your family without the permission of this office, because I don't want you incurring any additional debt.
I can't ask him for money unless you tell me it's okay?
Correct, ma'am.
Wow.
Now, bonuses. Do you have any bonus incentive plan for any commissions with your current employment?
Nope, I'm just the bookkeeper.
Okay. The interest, you report $120 a month. What's that from?
That's my savings account.
Are those the accounts you identified on the Form 48, or are there additional accounts?
No, that's the Washington Mutual and the Sun Trust.
Okay, and the dividends, what are the dividends from?
That's from my Charles Schwab accounts. I told you about those.
Okay, and the rental income, that's from your property?
That's from my rent house, right.
Well, why such a significant difference between the gross and the net?
Well, I just put the gross down, and then I take out the mortgage payment, and I have to fix stuff along the way, and I think that's about the profit I make.
Okay, well, you didn't identify it as a liability on the next page, correct?
No, I just put my real home on that one.
Okay. Well, you've indicated no alimony or child support, no Social Security or other government benefits, no pensions or annuities, and no allowances for housing, auto, travel for either you or your husband?
Right. The only thing I put on there was my husband's wages.
Okay, and your husband, he currently earns $4,500 a month gross with a net of $3,754?
Right, that's right. You know, he's not very happy about it, but here's a copy of his check stub.
Okay. He's a school teacher, correct?
That's right.
Does he receive payments throughout the calendar year or just the school year?
No, calendar year. They divide it out in 12 months.
Does he do anything on the side, like coaching, or is he employed during the summer months at all?
No.
All right, Brad, lots of issues there as in all of this scenario, but let's focus on the employment situation. That was part of, especially at the beginning of that segment. What piques your interest about that employment situation of the offender, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, certainly piques my interest that she's working for her brother. We do have someone involved in a financial crime. There may be a third-party risk involved. Okay. We will want to investigate that further, maybe speak with the family member and look into exactly what she's making and if bonuses and commissions are a part of that.
Okay. Now, out to the field again in Lou Queso in the Eastern District of New York. Lou, first of all, any reactions, or if you want to elaborate on what Brad was talking about in terms of the employment situation and how you might approach that, and also that notion of possibly incurring additional debt and raising the red flag there.
Well, I think that one thing we have to look at, one positive thing is that she's working for the brother, so there shouldn't be any problems in verifying what her actual income is.
Mm-hmm.
The brother is more or less put in the spot now that he's going to have to open up his books to the probation department and really, provide us with substantial documentation, which helps us tremendously. So that's the other flip side to maybe the brother would help her in possibly paying her off the books or giving her cash monies aside from her wages.
Okay. Now, but I guess also on the bright side, it also helps, I guess, Brad, that she's employed.
That's correct.
All right.
She does have a job, and it's something we're going to look for and expect from someone who's on supervised release.
Excellent. Now, we're getting also into the spouse's wages and that kind of thing, and that can get kind of dicey, not to mention causing issues between the offender and her spouse. Catherine Gomez, let me go out to you and ask if you have any sort of advice or reactions to this notion of the degree to which the officer has leverage regarding the spouse.
Well, I speak from a pre-sentence investigation standpoint, and I think it's probably a little bit easier for us to get information from people because they're putting their best foot forward. They're having this comprehensive background report being written prior to their sentencing, and they want to look as good as possible for the judge. When I encounter situations where defendants are a little bit reluctant to provide that information, I just explain to them that at least from the pre-sentence standpoint, I'm looking to verify the household income and the household expenditures, and I want the defendant to be able to show that they can afford where they're living, that their income sources are legitimate, and I generally have success with that. I have probably had a couple of occasions where maybe they would provide verification of somebody's of their spouse's income, but they wouldn't provide copies of their income tax returns, something of that nature, in which case that would be documented in the pre-sentence investigation report.
Excellent. All right, moving right along. Skipping ahead now to the bottom line for Ms. Lone's monthly cash inflows and moving on to evaluating her monthly cash outflows. The interview continues.
Okay, ma'am, we're looking at a total monthly gross of $9,625 with a net of $7,510, correct?
Right.
Okay, now taking a look at your outflows, you identified the $1,300 as your mortgage payment, and your groceries are $1,000. Is that for all 5 people in the household?
Well, that's right, but I don't keep exact amounts. I just thought that's probably what we spent.
How do you typically pay for your groceries?
Sometimes we use credit cards and sometimes we use cash.
Do you retain the receipts?
No, I throw them away.
Okay, over the course of the next month, I'm going to ask you to keep all your shopping receipts so that we can take a look at them, because I suspect at the end of the month, the figure isn't going to be a perfect 1,000. It might be a little bit more. You might be surprised it even might be a little less. Keep all the receipts and supply them to us. Now, in terms of your utilities, did you bring an electric statement with you?
Well, I brought the last one. It's a little lower. It's usually about $250.
Well, the $250 seems a bit high.
Well, but in the summer it can be as high as $250.
Well, absolutely, but in the winter it can be significantly lower.
Well, I thought you wanted the most I pay every month.
No, I want what it is, ma'am. So I'm going to need your most recent statement. But on that electric statement, it should give me an idea of what your electrical use is throughout the entire year. Like I said, $250 appears a little bit high to me. Now, in terms of your water bill and sewer, do you pay that monthly or do you pay that every couple of months?
No, that's every month.
Do you have a statement for that?
Well, I have the last one.
Okay, and does that vary or does it stay pretty consistent?
No, that one doesn't change very much.
Well, what do you think it fluctuates between?
Oh, maybe $10 or $12.
Again, it's a perfect figure of $120.
Well, I was rounding up.
Well, I can't have you round up, ma'am. I need exact figures.
Okay.
Now, your telephone bill, $180. That also seems a bit high. Do you have family members that live across the states that you're making a lot of long-distance calls to? Or are there other services on the phone?
Well, I've got family, and then I've got my 2 older kids have cell phones, and my husband and I have to have cell phones.
Ma'am, I just want the information on the household phone. I understand the convenience of cell phones, but we're talking about necessary monthly expenses here.
Well, who determines what's necessary?
We do.
Well, how do you know that?
Because we have guidelines we go by, and it's probably unnecessary for an 8- and a 14-year-old to have cell phones. Now, I'm not going to say that they can't have phones, but all I'm saying is that we're not going to consider it when we're determining what necessary monthly expenses are. And basic cable, $40. Is that the exact figure, or again, are you rounding up?
Well, it's probably $37 or $37.50.
Well, I need the exact figures, and I need the statement. Skipping down for a moment to the loan payment listed here, $420. What is that? Is that your husband's motor vehicle?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Best practices with regard to valuing things like, or verifying expenditures like grocery expenses and that kind of thing. It's kind of loosey-goosey.
It is. We need exact numbers so that we can work with the offender for the next several years. We need a picture of her exact financial status to get her on a right payment plan that she can live with and that we can expect payment from on a regular basis.
Okay. Also, going out to the field, back out to David Ball in Western District of New York. David, there was a big emphasis on sort of the kinds of expenses or expenditures she wanted to have, and what's allowed versus what's not allowed. We got into this issue of cell phones for an 8 and a 14-year-old. It is the 21st century, after all. Talk a little bit about allowable versus non-allowable.
Well, I think that it's important for the officers in this field to know that reference is made in the financial investigation desk reference as well as the monograph 114 to discuss and outline some allowable and non-allowable expenses. Of course, that's going to be different depending upon what district or what part of the country you might be in and the standard or cost of living it is in that particular region.
Excellent. And good point about not only that there are these objective guidelines that exist in the monograph 114 that are also incorporated into the desk reference, but that there is some variation among districts, and you got to keep that in mind. Any reaction to that, Brad?
David's absolutely correct. Where you're at in the country may dictate what kind of expenses you might have.
Okay, now there was a reference to a $420 payment that I guess is the payment on the car. We're talking again about the Lexus. Reactions?
That is a healthy car payment. If we can find some way to work that down, maybe a refinance, maybe sell it to get a lesser vehicle, at the end of the year you're going to realize maybe several $100s, and throughout the term of her supervised release maybe $1,000 or $2,000 in restitution paid to the victim.
Excellent. Okay. Skipping ahead to the conclusion of the interview, where John and Ms. Lone talk about credit cards and the relation of credit card-related outflows back to the liabilities listed on the 48 and some other important things.
Okay, Ms. Lone, with regard to your credit card payments, you indicate $300. That's 2 credit cards for $150 apiece, correct?
That's right.
Okay, but we have already established that the real minimum payment is $35.
Yeah, that's true.
So in determining your necessary monthly cash flow, I'm going to reduce that figure from $300 to $70.
Well, I guess if you have to.
Do you have any other credit cards?
No.
Have you applied for any more credit cards since you've been released?
No, but we got those statements in the mail with the approval form, and they even included the card.
Well, you need to remember your special condition that prohibits you from incurring any additional credit.
Well, I didn't think it counted if they just sent it to me. I didn't even ask for it.
Yeah, it does count, unless you have permission from our office. You need not to incur any additional debt or use any type of credit cards. Do you understand that?
Yes, I understand.
Well, I'm looking at a copy of your credit report here, ma'am, and it indicates that there are several other credit cards that you failed to indicate on this form.
Oh, but we haven't used those in years.
But you still have them, right?
Well, I think so, but we don't use them.
Well, I understand that, ma'am, but the net worth statement asks you to identify all credit cards.
All right, then I'll fix that then.
Yes, you will, ma'am, because even though you don't use them, that's credit that's available to you.
Well, I put some other things on there, like our medical expenses.
Okay, the medical expenses, you list $200. Is that this month?
Well, one of my kids had an accident, and I had to take him to the emergency clinic.
Okay, so it's not a monthly thing, and why wasn't it covered in insurance?
Well, because we had to pay out of pocket. It was an emergency clinic.
Okay, do you get reimbursed from the insurance company?
Well, we haven't got it yet.
But you're going to, correct?
Well, I hope so.
Okay, so that's not a necessary monthly expense, and it's not something that's typical each month.
Well, no, I guess not.
You currently have no co-payments. You haven't listed any other items, but you did list under other factors that may affect your monthly cash flow some miscellaneous lawn care and entertainment of $400. Why don't you tell me about that?
Well, it's really important. I have to get my nails done, and we take the kids to the movies and entertainment, and we have to have the yard done because we both work. We're very busy.
Sure, ma'am. I know you want to keep the kids active. However, we don't consider those necessary monthly expenses when determining your monthly cash flow. Again, I'm not saying that your kids can't do that stuff, but we're not going to take it into consideration when we're coming up with an appropriate payment.
Well, are you going to let my kids do anything?
I'm sure we will, ma'am, but within reason. $400 is rather high, so you need to explore some things within your community at no cost, such as events sponsored through the school or the town.
Boy, there's a lot that's going to have to change.
Yeah, but because your husband's involved in the school, he's probably aware of these resources. Now, if we take a look at what we've reported so far, and keep in mind that I suspect that these numbers are going to change once you provide me with the accurate information, but just taking a look at the monies that we've adjusted right now, we've removed the $400, we've removed the $200, and we've reduced the $300 to $70. So if you give me 1 second here, we're looking at a new total of $4,330.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah, that would give you a net monthly cash flow of $3,180 as opposed to the $2,350. That's a significant amount of money left over each month. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but you know, every month is different.
Absolutely. I wouldn't argue with you there, but it's still a significant difference.
All right, Brad. She wants to get her nails done. Allowable or non-allowable?
Well, most likely not allowable. We're going to have to come to some realization that lifestyle changes are imminent and what's necessary versus what's a desire.
And over the course of that segment, I mean, she seemed to finally be coming to the realization. In fact, she says, boy, there's a lot that's going to have to change. And when John sort of gave her what the real figures might be, she was able to see the difference.
Yes, and we'll work with the offender throughout the term of her supervised release so that she can realize possibly more disposable income by cutting back on things that are unnecessary expenditures.
Excellent. Now, going out to the field and to Jeff Gwynn. Jeff, we heard in that exchange that the officer had taken a look at her credit report, had matched that going back to the Form 48, had matched that against the 48 and noticed that she hadn't reported all of the cards that were appearing on her credit report. Talk a little bit about the relevance of the credit report and making sure that everything that's there is on the 48.
In addition to the cards that she failed to report that she says she has not used, it will show the last activity that she has used the cards. It'll also show any recent inquiries into her credit history, which would indicate that she has attempted to obtain credit, and which she has also reported she has failed to do that.
Okay. We did receive a fax, and now is a good time to take it up because it refers to credit reports. It's from Warren Maxwell, Deputy Chief in the District of Connecticut in the Bridgeport office. Thanks, Warren, for sending this in. And he says, a couple of different comments, this one about credit reports. Credit reports are also a good source of information to determine if a defendant/offender has a gambling history. Casino records are highly detailed regarding amounts of gains and losses, average bet, dates, etc. Excellent point, and I think that's important with regard to casinos because we've seen an increasing number of jurisdictions with casinos. It used to be basically Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Now we're talking about the District of Connecticut as well as several other districts. So that's a really good point and an interesting use of the credit report. Any reactions, Brad, to that?
No, he's absolutely correct, and I believe also on the income tax returns there's an area for other income, and I believe that it also has a notation there for winnings. So that might be something we can look at also to see if she's a gambler.
Excellent. All right. Let me ask anybody in the field if they have any reactions to that last part about the use of the credit report, what's reported on the 48, the use of credit card debt, or the behavior of the offender.
Yeah, this is Dave in Western New York.
Hi, Dave.
I guess I would make a couple points.
Sure.
The offender has to understand, and the officer needs to know, that this is going to be a long-term focused relationship. And what we would want to know is, did she purposely leave some of this information off of her financial statement, or was it just an oversight? It seems to be that she always estimated her expenses or rounded up, or she wasn't sure on some questions, or didn't have some answers. And that's something the officer needs to keep in mind during the whole term of supervision, whether or not this person is like that in general, or if this was a particular instance in time where she just didn't have all of that information.
Yeah, excellent point. Because not only, again, we're not only just concerned about the numbers, and getting to net worth and monthly cash flow, we're concerned about using that reporting process and that interview process to try to figure out who this person is. Reaction?
You're absolutely correct. The officer has done an excellent job so far at chipping away gray area so that we have a real good picture of exactly where she's at and pointing her in the right direction, telling her throughout the course of your supervised release, this is where we're going to be taking you, and we would really like you to go there willingly.
Mm-hmm.
So the officer did an excellent job, and you're absolutely correct.
Excellent. We are rejoined by Clay Foster from the District of New Hampshire back at the table. Welcome back, Clay.
Thank you, Mark.
Let me ask you, you've had an opportunity to observe the role play and what was going on during the course of the exchange. Give us your reactions briefly, and what are the most important things you think are important for officers to take away from the exchange?
Well, Mark, one of the aspects I found very interesting about the scenario that we watched was that it really pointed out probably the most important aspect that we want officers out in the field to understand, that this is simply an interview. This is something probation officers are extremely good at anyways. We get paid to talk to people and to ferret out facts and to look for non-congruent little pieces of information that doesn't make sense to us. And that's all we're really doing in a financial investigation, and that's what the officer was doing in this particular investigation. Holding the offender accountable for the figures that she provided, not taking rounded up figures or guesstimations as to what was there. Another aspect that I really liked about the way that the process was portrayed was that the officer made sure that the offender was made aware that this was a major responsibility and that there were certain expenses, necessary expenses, that were going to be allowed, but certain things that were not going to be allowed. I also think that although this was a post-conviction supervision interview, had this been a pre-sentence interview, this would have been the time when I think the officer would have been looking at structuring the sentencing recommendation in a way of coming up with appropriate special conditions that are going to help the supervision officer down the road. For instance, no additional lines of credit without permission of the probation officer, lumps, not the lump sum payment so much, but windfall profit special conditions, so that the offender is placed on notice from the beginning that any income that comes into her possession after being sentenced is going to be put towards the obligation.
Excellent. Let me now sort of turn to our two players, and first of all thank John and Sharon for that wonderful role play. My agent will call their agent and they'll do lunch. Sharon, first to you. Let's get your reaction. You all wrote this script. Let's get your reaction to what you think the most important things for folks in the viewing audience are to sort of take away from this exercise.
Well, thank you, Mark. I think what's important here is that we demonstrated that there's a pattern and a process to follow. There's guidance available for every step, that financial investigations are a very important part of supervision, and that really any officer can learn to competently produce those.
Excellent. All right. John, same thing. Reactions and what should officers, in your view, try to take away from this thing?
Well, the most important thing they need to remember, and as Clay stated, that this is the first step in what's going to become a long process throughout the individual's term of supervision. Also, the importance of the need for verification of all information provided, the need to use exact figures, and really setting a tone with this initial interview. And probably the most important thing is an officer needs to feel comfortable at the end of the day with the information provided by the defendant and have a clear understanding of that information.
Excellent. As you were speaking, John, we had a fax come in from U.S. Probation Officer Joe Garcia in the Central District of California. Thanks, Joe. A couple of different related points. In the Central District of California, we utilize IRS tables to determine allowable monthly expenses. Excellent. Good tip. For example, if the IRS tables reflect that a family of 4 should be paying $1,600 per month in Orange County, then we use that figure as the maximum allowable for rent. If an individual is paying more than that, the individual is only credited for $1,600. The difference is applied toward the net cash flow. Are IRS tables used in other districts? Brad?
I'm sure that they probably are, but that's something that sounds like a valuable resource with an agency where you have a close working relationship, and each office or each district probably has something similar to that that they can utilize for exactly the same purpose that you're using it.
Let me ask folks on the phone, in your districts, do you resort to IRS tables for similar purposes?
Mark, it's Catherine.
Hey, Catherine.
Southern District.
Yep.
I know when I first came here about 7 years ago, I came here from the Internal Revenue Service, and I brought all of the allowable expense tables with me. And I sat down with a group of supervision officers and hammered out what, I don't think we used it verbatim, because there were some things that you know, that the IRS wouldn't allow, that they would allow, and vice versa. But I think they used it as a guideline, and I think in most cases that's appropriate. And it probably every so often, given the escalating prices of real estate and the cost of living going up, it should be reevaluated.
Excellent. Anybody else on the phone want to say anything about IRS tables? Jeff?
No, as far as I know, our district, no one uses it, but it does sound like a very valuable resource.
See, it was an IRS related question, so I had to ask you since you're a CPA. A couple of things are pointed out there that I think are important. First, there's a lot of talent in our system, and there's a lot of expertise and advice that we can all benefit from. Secondly, folks have had other careers as CPAs or in the IRS or whatever. All of the faculty and advisory committee members for this program are listed in the participant guide, and you should feel free to contact them if you have specific questions. Another point that was made by Warren Maxwell in his facts, which I neglected to bring up, but now is a good time to do it. He says, I strongly recommend sending financial releases to area casinos, again, an issue regarding casinos, when there does not appear to be a reasonable explanation as to where the money went in a fraud case, or the explanation cannot be verified. Any reaction to that?
No, I think it's a wise use of what we have available to us. Again, in Connecticut, they have proximity to maybe Atlantic City and Indian casinos, and in Florida we have Seminole casinos throughout the state. It's something that you might want to look at if you suspect that someone might be engaged in gambling activity.
Excellent. All right, I want to go over to Clay Foster again, and Clay, ask you, we talked a little bit about leverage over the spouse and getting access to his financial information. First, talk about why that's so important to have that information, and secondly, some of the tools an officer might be able to use in order to extract that information. Catherine talked about pre-sentence. Could you talk to supervision?
Certainly, Mark, and it is a very contentious part of the interview process when we're talking about individuals in a household and what they're making. First thing I would point out is that there is statutory authority for us to gather that information. When they recodified 3663 in dealing with the restitution and fine sections, they gave us the ability to get household income so that we could come up with a reasonable payment schedule so that individuals could not hide behind the expenses of the family and then claim they were paying more than they were legitimately having to pay. Now, certainly there are times when the individual is going to say, no, I'm not going to give it to you. You have a couple options if that occurs. My first option, frankly, if you have a good relationship with the defense attorney, and we've actually used this in the past, is to talk to them. They'll oftentimes, having been experienced with this problem in the past with our office, be able to provide their client with the information or the advice that giving us that information will save them a lot of time and trouble. If that doesn't work, my next step would go to the flu unit. I go back to the interview you all had with Tamara Fine, and having a deposition taken is probably the next best step. It's amazing what happens when the defendant and his or her spouse receive a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office to report for deposition. Finally, you always have the option of taking it back to court, and certainly having a special condition for full financial disclosure having been placed on the judgment is also extremely helpful at that point.
Excellent. So really sort of know what your tools and what your leverage is before you get into the interview and too deeply into the financial investigation. John Hertig, let me get any reactions from you either to what Clay said or anything else that's come up so far in the conversation. A couple minutes left.
No, I agree wholeheartedly with what Clay just described. I just would also caution people that ultimately you do have to be aware of what your court's position is regarding spousal income, and ultimately rely on direction from your court and where you do seek that out.
Excellent. Sharon, any parting shots from you on this or anything else we've covered so far?
No, I don't think parting shots necessarily, but I do think that it's important that officers be able to follow through this process, use a participant guide, and have an opportunity to work through financial investigations and become comfortable with financial investigations. We mentioned that there's going to be other series that'll be a bit more complex. Getting comfortable at this level will increase their ability to move farther and do more complex financial investigations later on.
Excellent. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and we're just about out of time. So let me take a moment to thank you, obviously, and thank you very much for tuning in and sending us those faxes, particularly Joe and Warren. And note that our next financial investigation broadcast will take place on December 2nd from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks very much to Brad Vaughn from the Middle District of Florida, John Herdig from the District of Massachusetts, Sharon Geider from the Northern District of Texas, Clay Foster from New Hampshire, and all of our panelists on the phone, and certainly to our crew here at the FJC, all of whom made this program possible. I'll see you next time.